It's my great pleasure to welcome our panel for today. And once they're joined me on, I'll ask them to introduce themselves. Panelists, if you'll join me. There we are. Okay, very good. Welcome to you all. I'm going to ask you each to tell us a little bit about yourselves and why you're here. We'll go alphabetically, starting with Peter.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Chacanias. I am an attorney at Flaster Greenberg, located in Cherry Hill, although we do have locations elsewhere, primarily Philadelphia and throughout the Northeast. We have another location in Northfield, New Jersey, for you shore individuals. I've been practicing law for approximately 10 years. The beginning of my career, I spent as a public defender, but then within about 2 years, made the transition to real estate and development, primarily working in the land use sector, where I've been practicing for now almost a decade. And I love this work. I love to help people realize projects and certain, in certain contexts, even dreams, and dealing with second homes and things like that, and other types of developments that I help with. So happy to be a part of the panel and looking forward to a very, very good discussion.
Okay, very good. Kate?
Thank you. Kate Gibbs, Deputy Director with ELEC 825. We are a statewide labor management fund that represents the combined interests of the members and signatory contractors of Local 825 operating engineers. So as heavy equipment operators, our members and contractors are responsible for all types of construction, from private and public, vertical and horizontal, and every single type of infrastructure. Our organization focuses on creating opportunities by promoting good policies at all levels of government that spur responsible economic development and investments in infrastructure. So that gives us a really unique perspective on that intersection of infrastructure and economic development. And we do that through direct project support, issue advocacy, engaging in business and industry organizations and chambers of commerce, and in discussions like we're having today. So really excited for the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Very good. Thank you for joining us. Last but certainly not least, Josh.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Josh Cuskin. I'm a director of design and construction here at the Rockefeller Group. At my company, we're a national-based commercial real estate developer. I sit in our New Jersey office, which covers, areas everywhere between New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and out through the Midwest, with a focus in Chicago and Columbus, Ohio at the moment. My time here, I've been at Rockefeller about 12 plus years. I've been in the industry about 16 to 17 plus years. We're focused mostly, at least in my region, on, industrial e-commerce warehousing. Been doing that probably the past 7 to 8 years. And, I've seen a lot of different shifts in the market, since COVID till now. And I'm happy to kind of talk about a lot of the different challenges and issues we've been seeing, even in just the last 6 to 12 months. So thanks for having me.
Okay, very good. And yes, we will certainly call on you for that. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. And we're actually going to start there, I think. As I was thinking about where to start this discussion, the first thought that occurred to me was we start talking about what everything costs, particularly materials, because that's what everybody's talking about these days. And I thought, well, I started to have second thoughts because we always start that way, whether it was, as Josh said, the pandemic, the generalized inflation, tariffs, interest rates. That's where we seem to start everything. So I thought maybe we should try something different. But this morning I was in Metro Park for the opening of Hackensack Meridian Health's new wellness center and headquarters there. And there, the executive from HMH, who was responsible for that project, began by talking about those very things: how much it cost, how they had struggled with supply chain issues, with tariffs, with interest rates, and the coldest winter in decades. They still managed to get it done in 30 months, he said, which he thought was basically on time. So I thought that actually is a pretty good place to start. And Katie, I want to start with you about what you're seeing now. What are the contractors, what is the union seeing in terms of the disruptions that we had experienced in the past? The last time we had a discussion like this, a lot of the discussion centered on tariffs. That seems to have been pulled back a little bit with the Supreme Court ruling. But and again, HMH had basically finished their construction by the time the war in the Middle East broke out, and that's something that now a lot of folks are dealing with. What's in general? What are you dealing with? What are the folks you talk to dealing with in terms of the high cost of materials?
Well, businesses of all kinds, the only thing that's worse than high cost is uncertainty. And that's the one thing that has been kind of consistent, whether it was the uncertainty presented by the pandemic, then going into tariffs, then coming into, a war. Clearly, I think every industry is affected. And for our market, the two main drivers are your materials and your labor costs. Labor costs are traditionally about 20% on a construction project, depending on the type and the size and scope, but that's about the size, the proportion. So, organizations like mine that represent both labor and the business side, which are the contractors who employ our membership, really have to look at that balance all the time. And, by being able to provide a well-skilled, credentialed workforce on demand for our contractors is something that helps mitigate these fluctuations and changes on the material side. So unfortunately, I think it's something that it's the new normal over the past, few years, where the only thing we can count on is the uncertainty. But again, being partnered with a labor organization like ours at least provides certainty on the labor side, because that not only you're getting that skilled workforce, but what the cost is going to be, because all of that is so prescribed.
Okay. But before I move on, I just want to ask you a little bit about the cost of fuel, because you mentioned that the operating engineers run these large machines. Just on my drive home a little while ago, I was looking at the price of diesel, which is heading towards $6 a gallon. Are you feeling those kinds of pressures yet? I mean, this is obviously what's going on in the Middle East and the price of oil. Are you seeing those kinds of pressures yet?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, businesses of all kinds in all industries, and especially in fuel intensive industries, are feeling it. And that's not something that's going away. It definitely impacts how many projects can get done, what projects contractors are considering bidding on, and making sure that we have that steady stream of work is really critical when you look at it from a workforce development end. Because if you don't have the certainty of projects that are coming, we can't organize, apprentice, train the right workforce. So it does continue to present challenges, but our organization has been around from when, we went from having steam powered to hydraulics and to mechanical engines. We'll continue to adapt. And that's, again, one of the benefits of partnering with a labor organization like ours.
Right. Okay. Josh, you alluded to a number of those issues. Can you give us a sense for what you're seeing now from the folks you work with, in terms of, whatever it might be? Are we still seeing supply chain disruptions? Are tariffs still an issue, or is it mainly from what's going on with in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think that the tariffs are not. I mean, this time last year, tariffs were the biggest hot button item everybody could talk about. But a lot of that uncertainty, and that's the key word that Katie hit on, that I think a lot of us are probably familiar with now, having lived that and then going through what we're going through now with the war in the Middle East. Uncertainty is really what sort of drives prices, up, and the volatility, and disrupts supply chains. But I haven't really been seeing any supply chain issues. I think it's more just about uncertainty of cost. And, when looking back to where we were, call it coming out of COVID 2021, 2022, material volatility was insane.
Right.
It felt like no matter week over week, there was price increases, material shortages, et cetera. I think the real constraint now is just, seems to be more on the labor side. I think we can get a little bit more predictability in the materials, but the labor constraint seems to be more of an issue. And one of the things that I've experienced in talking to and working through a handful of different developments over the last year and a half is the one thing that, I guess you can look at as a constant is the volume and level of activity in real estate development. Coming out of COVID and in the times of COVID, the volume was very high. And so you had all these people in the market at the same time trying to do the same thing. And that really put a strain on all that supply chain and cost. The one thing now different than what we were looking at then is the new construction starts, the volume of development activity is definitely suppressed from that point. And what I've seen when bidding out construction projects is because the subcontractor markets, the construction general contractor, pool of vendors, et cetera, because they're so starved for work, they've been willing to sort of either absorb some of those price increases and some of that volatility risk rather than pass it on to us. But I mean, the problem still remains that, prices have not come down and they still remain high. So, underwriting for that is tough.
Okay. I just before I move on, I just want to ask a question about the dynamic, the two different dynamics that you were talking about heading into COVID. As you said, there seemed to be a lot in the pipeline. There was a lot of activity. There was a lot going on. Now, not so much. Is that a function of the uncertainty that we're seeing? We were just it's just a different world than it was pre-pandemic, that there's a lot people are just more concerned because the pandemic seemed to come out of nowhere, and all of these kinds of developments have sort of been building for several months. Is that the dynamic that you're describing? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just asking what the difference.
Yeah, no, I think a little bit of it is that where you have, you've sort of priced it out, to the point where, it doesn't pencil out anymore on paper, right? From a financial sense, you've kind of reached a cap in a price point where, people can't make money, on certain development deals like they used to. But the other part is that, I think we have hit a little bit of an absorption point, in the market where everybody, when we were sidelined during COVID, was shifting to online sales and e-commerce. And I think everybody over hedged a little bit with how much that was going to, grow. And I think we sort of reached that limit or that point, and we're kind of in a reset period right now and trying to actually figure out, okay, what does all that mean? Did we overreach ourselves a little much? And I think, so new developments, developers, end users are being a lot more strategic in the areas they build, the types of products they build, and how they, roll out their business plan for the years to come.
Okay. All right, Peter, I'll turn to you then and ask, first of all, the same sort of question. Are you seeing the same kinds of things that your fellow panelists are seeing? And then number two, I want to get back to something that Josh said, because in talking to some of your peers, other attorneys in this area, that was a big part of their practice starting in the pandemic, is figuring out how to allocate some of the risk and some of the kinds of costs that developers, contractors were incurring. But first, give me your sense for what you're hearing about what the market is like these days.
No, sure. And I would agree 100% with Kate and Josh. So I'll kind of piggyback off of them. Dealing in the area that I typically deal with is on the development side, which is essentially helping developers get their approvals, whether it's from the municipality, the county, the state, whomever. And what's interesting is that in many cases, especially through the pandemic, what I kept running into were clients, whether it was a housing development, a warehouse, residential, commercial, a multi-use kind of component. I kept having clients come back to me a year or two later saying, Pete, we need to extend our approval. We need to extend our approval. Mm-hmm. Now, in New Jersey, typically most approvals, it's broken up into two. So one, you have a period of protection from zoning changes, which means that your approval doesn't expire, but to the extent that the zoning changes, you're no longer inundated from that. Or some municipalities, in fact, I think a lot of municipalities are getting more aggressive with this. They're saying, no, your approval expires after 2 years because of the way things change nowadays. They can't necessarily rely on prior approvals to be consistent with the surrounding area anymore. So they have to make them expire. And because of the high cost of things, whether it's materials, wood, I remember being a giant thing that I kept hearing from a lot of my clients.
Absolutely.
And now, and again, with oil and fuel, it's only gotten worse, I think. They kept saying, Pete, we got our approvals, but they're kind of putting things on ice, waiting it to become a little bit more cost effective to actually build them. And then when it's not, they come to me and say, hey, Pete, can you get us an extension of our approval? And in most cases, sure, but sometimes then you run into, again, a changing environment around the property, and the strain on cost affects that greatly. And then on top of that, it makes developers sometimes a little, like Josh said, a little bit more strategic on how they do these things. Because I remember during COVID, the warehousing was the big push.
Mhm.
You need to get the warehouses so people can have their boxes, their Amazon boxes delivered to them as quickly as possible. That I think was a bit, similar to what Josh was saying about the e-commerce and things like that. It was almost over anticipated how much warehousing was going to be needed. So clients are certainly being, and developers themselves are certainly being more strategic in how they implement these things.
Okay.
And now it's getting interesting to see how it affects the affordable housing developments with the new fourth round coming in from affordable housing, and then the housing shortage in New Jersey. It's getting very interesting as to these two kind of things that are kind of colliding with one another in terms of we need this, but right now it might be a little too expensive to build it and then not as profitable.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. And we're going to get to a bunch of those other issues as we go along. I just want to stick with costs for a minute because I want to get Kate's view on the whole workforce issue. But first, Josh, you mentioned it, so I wonder if you'd flesh that out a little bit. You mentioned the workforce, the problems with the workforce. What exactly are you referring to? Just a skills gap, a lack of the kinds of skills and experience and expertise that is necessary to do the kinds of things, do the kind of work that you're doing and that your clients are doing?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of it, if I'm being honest. There's definitely an aging workforce, the skilled labor trades that, once were, I think are not as prevalent in today's market. I think a lot of the younger generation has chosen to go off to, more of a traditional like university college type setting rather than into a trade profession.
Mm-hmm.
And so finding good labor at a good price point is hard. And so, for us, it's I think more of a factor sometimes than people realize. And I heard Kate mention the statistic of labor ends up being like 20% of your total construction projects. But with it, you can have all the materials in the world, and unfortunately, if you don't have the people to build it, it's not gonna happen, right?
Right. Okay. So, Kate, let's get your view on that then too. I know the local has a fairly extensive training program. How is that working? And are they is the local and your contractor members are they feeling the same pinch?
So the New Jersey building trades collectively spends about $100 million a year on training and apprenticeship in these skilled trades.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to speak for every trade, but something I hear from my colleagues a lot and something that we experience, we do not have a shortage in terms of people who want to pursue these career paths. When we open our apprenticeship portal, we used to do it in person prior to COVID. People would line up for days. They would start lining up on Thursdays and Fridays before a holiday weekend to get the application on Tuesday. We moved the process online. Usually our portal can only stay open about 2 minutes before we reach our capacity. So it's not a problem of not having a supply of folks, whether straight from high school or people who are underemployed who want to pursue, the career path opportunities that the skilled trades provide. It's making sure that we have an adequate pipeline of work to put those people onto not only the on-the-job training that they need during their apprenticeship, but for our journeymen as well, right? Tomorrow we could open up our portal and take as many people that want to apply, which would be thousands. Just from seeing the results over the past few years. The problem is that then you'd have a lot of members sitting on the out of work list, and that doesn't help our existing members and it doesn't help future members. So making sure that we have, again, that uncertainty in the market is hard for organizations like mine to make sure that we're responsibly organizing and apprenticing and training the right number to meet not only the amount of work, but where the work is going to be, because there's different skill sets in all the different types of construction that we do. So one of the things I think that's a common theme through everything that we've discussed so far is the time that it takes in New Jersey to bring a project from idea and concept and dream, as Peter said, to actually having groundbreakings. And that delay creates uncertainty. It increased costs. it makes financing more difficult because the longer you have to carry a project on the front end, all those soft costs accumulate, makes it more difficult for construction financing, your overall financing. Again, all of these things are kind of catalytic, and they build off of each other. So it's something that we're always working on, that we're very cognizant of. But again, that's why the unique partnership that we have at ELEC, where we're representing the membership and the signatory contractors, really helps us have a direct line and information, right from our contractors. And the relationship between our contracting association and our building trades here in New Jersey is really unique. The rest of the country, it's very adversarial. Here in New Jersey, we work hand in glove with our union contracting partners and have active labor management funds like mine in several of the trades. So it's something we're looking at. But again, if we can improve the front end and the stuff that Peter and Josh both work on, which is that pre-development work of getting the project to groundbreaking, the more we can fix that part, the better planning we can do on the workforce side.
Okay. All right. And we are going to talk about that, Peter. It's coming.
I'm chomping at the bit, because I couldn't agree more. And how we shrink that is one of the most important topics we can discuss.
Okay. And before we get there, what I hear Josh and Kate describing is sort of almost a vicious circle. Josh is saying that the lack of workers is sort of one of the factors in fewer projects, and Kate is saying fewer projects mean it's more difficult to get these workers going. And I wonder if there's any way out of that at this point, Josh. I mean, is it just going to take a completely different economy to get things moving again?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is cyclical to some extent, and there's always going to be ups and downs in the market, and Kate certainly can speak to the programs behind the apprenticeships and the recruiting process better than I can, because that's what she
Right.
lives and does. But
Mm-hmm.
I just think that there's got to come a point where the labor out there in the market is not going to fix itself per se.
Right.
There has to be some sort of, either, like you said, Peter, or Jeff rather, sorry. There has to be this resurgence in projects, maybe to some extent, but there also has to be, in parallel with that, enough of the workforce and the population to get involved.
Okay. Right. And another, before we move on to some of the rules and the policy questions, one more issue in terms of costs, and that's energy. It was a major part of the gubernatorial campaign we just went through. The governor, among her very first actions, were issuing executive orders on trying to control the cost of energy. Peter, I'll just start with you on this. Does the high cost of power, electricity, gas, oil, diesel, is that a significant factor in determining whether folks build here in New Jersey or not? I mean, do you hear that complaint from the folks you work with, or is it really just the permitting that they're?
I mean, it's primarily permitting. I'll say
Okay.
that, but I won't say that energy doesn't play a factor, especially since now. I mean, yeah, in terms of fuel, oil, gas. Well, what's interesting now is that New Jersey, for good or bad, is a very environmentally conscious state. So it does have a bit of a push, and you can get in certain tax breaks for renewable energy sources. So solar, I think, is a big thing. I have a couple of clients now who are working on producing certain solar farms. And one of the ways, I think, that one of the reasons they're doing that is because they're trying to spread out the energy requirement a little bit, so that you don't have to rely strictly on one particular item, such as oil, which then jacks up in terms of cost when you're dealing with something like Iran. But that being said, what's interesting now is the actual development surrounding energy is not only focused on what energy will cost, but it's specifically focused on actual ways to produce that energy. So, for example, I just mentioned solar farms. There are entire development projects that I work on related strictly to solar farms that exist strictly for the purposes of producing energy, as opposed to making use of it. Of course, it uses energy, but what I'm saying is, and now you're getting that in the context of, and I might be going a little off topic here, but I think it's somewhat relevant.
Okay.
In the context of data centers, because the goal there is to produce enough I don't know if energy is the word, but enough data essentially for a lot of the AI that's starting to come through, which is another big thing. So, and then what data centers require in terms of energy, especially in terms of cooling them, that is very important. So yes, absolutely, energy is a factor in terms of the cost effectiveness of certain projects, especially if the project itself revolves around the production of energy. But again, like I said, permitting and the miles and miles of red tape and approvals that you need to go through, I think, is probably the biggest hindrance between the two.
Okay. All right.
I will say,
Yeah,
if
go ahead.
I may, Jeff,
Yes,
to
absolutely.
to add to Peter's point, about your question, is energy a defining factor in where people are developing and wanting to go? I'd say it's the more pressing issue is, lack of infrastructure and just the availability of infrastructure. And especially around, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the segment here, the AI boom and the data center stuff, right? The cost of energy is high. It's going to stay high. That is a little bit more predictable than, wondering whether or not you can actually get power to your building or water to your building or sewer, gas, et cetera. So I think, the more pressing and important factor in determining where you build is availability of infrastructure than it is just, hey, those costs are going to be high for energy, most likely anywhere you go. And there are ways to offset that through, solar programs and other, energy efficiency type equipment, et cetera, that you can install and try to, work with. But, there's a lot of challenge right now in infrastructure.
Okay.
If I can,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Pete.
Kate, and then Peter.
Well, because we work on every single type of infrastructure, including every single type of energy generation, distribution, and transmission, we have a really wide vantage point because there's no incentive for us to pick winners and losers because we work on all of it, right? So we look at it as what is the best policy. And so to support economic development, it's about the things we just talked about, cost and reliability. The answer to both, this is a basic supply and demand issue, right? We have reduced the supply. Demand continues to grow because since the first time man-made fire, energy demand has only gone in one direction, right? It's going to keep going. And as we have more and more technologies coming online, it's only going in one direction. And the only answer is to increase the supply, which means we have to quickly build energy generation. And it doesn't matter the type. We have to quickly build more affordable generation because that's going to add to the supply, which will help with the price. But again, it's not going to be, as both I think of you said, it's not going to be a quick fix. We have significant infrastructure issues here in this state that we need to address. And the other piece is that when you look at what strategic economic development opportunities we have in this state, they're big energy users, right? We're the medicine chest of the world, pharma. From research and development to manufacturing to storing to distributing, that takes a lot of energy. Manufacturing, AI, data centers, warehouse and logistics, all of that takes a lot of energy. So we need to make sure that we're building that generation to support not only the residential side and make sure that people can afford to heat their homes and power their homes, but almost more importantly, to make sure that our economy is sustained with energy that they can rely on.
Right. Peter, go ahead.
Well, Kate touched on a lot of it. The only thing I'll just piggyback off of is not only a lack of infrastructure, but even in spots where the infrastructure exists, it's incredibly dated in a lot of places in New Jersey, which then you get into, okay, it exists, but can it actually maintain and produce the required energy for, again, something like a data center? So for example, when you're dealing with a data center, and I'm sorry to harp on that, it's just kind of the new big thing, I think, warehousing, then data centers kind of was the shift along with housing, which is always kind of looming, was, it takes a tremendous amount of water, is my understanding, to cool. Then the question becomes, okay, where we're building this, do we have simply enough where we can cool it? And that's a big thing. So yeah, it's just piggybacking off of Josh and Kate. It's not just lack of infrastructure; it's also the how outdated it can be in many parts of the state. And then the question becomes, okay, do we update it? Do we build new? If so, where do we build it? Again, New Jersey is a very environmentally conscious state, which is one of those red hurdles you have to get through. So it's an interesting question.
Okay. And just let me be clear. You're all three of you have mentioned the question of infrastructure, specifically in the context of energy and energy costs. Are you talking about building generation facilities, pipelines, transmission lines, water lines to cool these things? Is that what we're talking about in terms of infrastructure here? Kate, you're nodding, so
Yeah, it's infrastructure. Everything you mentioned is
okay.
infrastructure, right?
Right.
It's our roads and bridges, it's our rail lines, it's water treatment, water distribution, it's energy generation, distribution, transmission, all of it. We have, as a state that has such a long, proud history, we've been, we were part of the Industrial Revolution. So we do have a lot of really old infrastructure, very complicated infrastructure that's, if you've seen GIS mapping of our infrastructure around the state, it's a very tangled maze. And, our utility partners in the state do a really good job of trying to do proactive maintenance and modernization. But again, you run into the same regulatory and approval hurdles that you do on private development. So all of these things are so connected and are cyclical.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And that's what I was getting to. Josh, was that, you were nodding. So I'm guessing that this is what you were talking about. Yes.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think all of us are saying the same thing. And there's definitely, one of the biggest, factors in all this is just time that it takes to actually, build out the infrastructure. And time is a killer of all things, right? Money being the biggest factor probably, and the uncertainty again that we keep talking about. But one of the things I'll mention also is that, what I've observed in the last, call it 5 or 6 years or so, is especially in, as it relates to the world that I live in with industrial, we've developed and New Jersey specifically, we've developed so much industrial in northern New Jersey to the point where there's really nowhere else to build. And if there is somewhere to build, it's got so much hair on it, nobody wants to touch it. It's it's environmentally challenged, it's geotechnically challenged, it's access challenged, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of the new development is pushed to South Jersey, and specifically in South Jersey, that is where I've realized that the lack of infrastructure has become more apparent. I'm working on a site right now that doesn't have water or sewer. And, it's challenging, to have to build out that infrastructure takes many more years of approval. You have to get other outside agencies involved, both at the state and local level that, maybe don't want to play nice in the sandbox together. So you're having to sort of broker and bridge those gaps. But it's also just the cost of it too, right? Who's gonna build it? Who's gonna pay for it? Who's gonna own and maintain it? You have challenges with easements and trying to get access through areas that the piping and the infrastructure needs to run through. So there's a whole host of issues that come along with, building out infrastructure. Not beside the fact that, like, is it just available, right?
Right. Okay, and it does implicate policy questions, which is the next sort of topic I wanted to sort of move to, and we'll segue into some of the other discussions, with the energy question, because Kate, I mean, I've talked to Greg Lalevee on any number of occasions, and in the months, years past, his mantra was, we should have an all of the above strategy. Yes, it's fine to work on solar and wind power, but we still need gas pipelines. We still need generation facilities. We still need transmission lines. And the Murphy administration was, I don't want to say unreceptive, but they had different priorities. Their main push was green energy, clean energy, getting New Jersey to a different place. This governor seems to actually have adopted at least the rhetoric that Greg was using. Are you seeing that from this administration, that they're moving in that direction at least?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of positive signals, like you said, rhetorically. I think that they're committed to building generation, and it's the only way that we're going to even start to touch the prices. But it really, we need the all of the above strategy, because every single type of energy generation has a different price tag. And we are part of the 13 state PJM grid. Right. And so policies in all 13 states that impact what type of energy they want to see produced in state and what they want to take out of the grid impacts the wholesale market cost of electricity, right? And again, we're restricting the supply, we're affecting the demand by requiring electrification, a move to EVs, technology advancing. That when you limit supply and you increase demand, prices are going to go up. So again, seeing a lot of optimistic signals from this administration, but there are still a lot of anti-natural gas advocates, and there's sentiment about it, despite it being a clean, efficient, and cheap way to move energy. The day that Phil Murphy took office, New Jersey was a net energy exporter, meaning we put more into the grid than we took out, and now we're importing about 40% of our energy, and that has a higher cost. And we lose out on the fact that every dollar that's spent on infrastructure creates $3 to $4 of economic benefit, in not just in local payroll taxes and local benefits from folks, during construction, patronizing local businesses. So you lose out on that economic benefit, that 4x economic benefit amplifier, and we're buying our energy that's more expensive because we're not generating it in state, and we're getting higher emissions anyway because those 13 states don't have the same policies we do. So we actually have more emissions being created from the grid today than we did when we had more natural gas and nuclear as part of our portfolio. The governor did sign a piece of legislation just a week or two that is the first step in allowing for more nuclear, which is huge because it's zero emissions and it's very affordable and it's very reliable. So that baseload generation is the only way out of it. And we're optimistic that all of the above approach that New Jersey relied on for years is going to come back.
Okay. Just the legislation Kate was referring to, essentially changing some outdated rules that were essentially making it impossible to build new nuclear power plants in New Jersey. And the governor did sign legislation that should, or is designed at least, to get that moving again. So Peter, given everything that we've talked about here, what Kate and Josh are saying makes perfect sense. We need more, and all the above strategy, more pipelines, more transmission lines, more generating facilities. Should be easy to get those things up and running, right? No problem there.
Absolutely. No question. It's the question that was ringing in my head, just as they were speaking, and just as you were asking your question, was where are we going to put it? Mm-hmm. That was the big question. And especially, Josh hit the nail on the head, I think, because South Jersey, I think, is lacking in infrastructure in many respects. And that's primarily where I'm stationed. I typically say my practice usually runs from 195 in Monmouth County down. Okay. And I've done some North Jersey stuff. My parents are from up there. I went to school up there, but that's kind of where a lot of the new stuff, if it's going to get constructed, is likely going to have to be. One of the biggest hurdles that I think we keep running into, and it's these conflicting goals within the state of New Jersey, which is we need housing, we need infrastructure, we need energy, and we need to protect the environment, which they're mutually exclusive, which means to protect the environment means to entirely and without question just leave it alone. Don't build anything. Don't chop down the trees. Naturally, as Kate was saying, there's still kind of a push against natural gas, even despite its cleanliness. So that's one of the biggest hurdles I think we're running into. And a good example of that is the real rules that were just recently passed and go into effect in July. But the legislature passed I believe it was a bipartisan resolution kind of saying that these rules were adopted potentially without legislative authority to do so. We need to really re-examine this. And while that may be true from a legislative separation of powers type angle, I think there is the realization from a more practical standpoint that, listen, you can't, because the real rules were incredibly prohibitive in terms of development, especially on the coast and on the shore, which is one of the most, New Jersey depends upon its shore communities for its survival. Right. So when you have those two things that are kind of colliding with one another, one has to give a little bit. And actually, there was recently testimony provided by a number of individuals, including the New Jersey Builders Association, regarding the real rules and how
Just
they
before you go, just the real rules are the resilient environments and landscape rules.
yes.
They have to do with water use, land use and water use, stormwater and
Yeah, what it's
flood
essentially,
regulations in particular. So that's what we're talking about. Just
yeah,
so our
exactly.
viewers understand what the real rules are.
Yep,
Sorry,
absolutely.
sorry, I didn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, no, no problem, no problem. And sometimes I take for granted that people will know that, so I apologize. And the reason I brought it up as an example is because it's designed to deal with what in New Jersey is accepted fact is rising sea levels and climate change,
Right.
which is the sea levels are rising, and we need to account for that. And again, it's a push to protect the environment, and you're dealing also with wetlands concerns as well, and that will hinder the development and the infrastructure creation that we're talking about. So you have to strike that balance in some capacity. And I think combining the kind of what's it, the everything all at once, we can do everything all at once type of approach with this need that yes, New Jersey is a beautiful state. I think approximately 20% of it is the pine lands. So obviously we don't want to tear into everything or all of that, but we do need to find a way to strike that balance between what we need to protect and what we need to produce, whether it's energy, housing, or the appropriate development for AI, data centers, warehousing, however you want to put it. Less retail, of course, and office space. That's kind of slowly dying away, but those other items are well in demand.
Okay. And Josh, I mean, you mentioned that you've done some work or starting to do work in South Jersey. I think you said that.
Yep.
And that's been a difficult place in years past. I mean, you had the Pinelands Commission, you had the Coastal Area Facilities Review Act. I mean, that takes a huge part of what South Jersey is that was governed by some fairly strict development rules. Have you seen any move? I mean, we mentioned some of the governor's rhetoric and some of her executive orders. Have you seen any move really that would sort of change the direction that and the dynamic that you're all talking about?
I haven't,
Okay.
you know, and maybe I haven't, been through it in more recent time because the specific developments that I'm engaged on or in here at Rockefeller, we've been at the entitlements for the better part of 4 to 5 years. And it's across the board. At the local level, it's extremely difficult. There's a lot of pushback, in the public, just anti-warehouse sentiment type stuff.
Not in my
Um,
backyard.
Not in my backyard. Yeah, that's a huge one.
We know
And a
it's
lot
got to
of
be somewhere. We just don't want it here.
Exactly. And a lot of that comes back to in what I believe is just, a lack of communication and educating the local public on the benefits that some of these developments actually bring to their community in terms of job creation, tax benefits, infrastructure upgrades, you name it. But so that's a whole separate issue. I think, just going back to the real rules and the level of permitting and the red tape, it's only gotten worse. And it's not only just a time suck for us, which is the killer again of a lot of our deals, right? The more time that passes on a development, you have too much uncertainty where you're going to end up finally being able to build it, and who knows where the market is at that point? Who knows what sort of shifts have changed from what you projected in your underwriting, but it's costly. I'm empathetic to the rules and understand why they're necessary, but I think to Peter's point, there does have to be a balance between that and are we serious about allowing and being pro-development in our state? Because with a lot of that new regulation, it takes time to process it all. You have to redesign to it, and it adds a lot of time and cost.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
um,
No, go ahead.
yeah, just in terms of the more local pushback, and that's something I deal with almost on a day-to-day basis in my individual practice. It's astounding how malicious that can sometimes be. And to Josh's point, a lot of it sometimes does revolve around people simply not understanding exactly what you're trying to do and how it will benefit them. And you always hit that wall, of course, of people being unwilling to understand and learn. They simply don't want to hear it. But one of the interesting things about New Jersey that I think is, well, I shouldn't say interesting, frustrating things about New Jersey is not just it's how many entities you need approval from.
Mhm.
First, it's the local board, which is usually one of the most restrictive because their purview is very limited. It's the municipality, and is this going to help us and our residents in any fashion? And even if it will, do the residents want it? And is it the board's place to kind of go above and beyond what the residents necessarily want? Say you get that, then you have to go through NJDEP. If there's there wetlands on the property, is there, like you said, it could be in the CAFRA zone. And then there's the county. Sometimes you have to go through the county if you're on a county road. Then you have to go through NJDOT if you're on a state road. And it's just all of these different individuals and entities that you're trying to work with, get approvals from, all of whom have their own particular agenda in most cases, all have very clear, sometimes very strict regulations and rules that they have to abide by and implement. And as you're navigating all of this, I can see why sometimes developers just look at projects and they simply ask the question, is this going to be worth it? And if we move forward, is it eventually going to be profitable? And it's a very fair question at the beginning. And then, what Kate was saying before, the gap between concept to ribbon cutting is only increasing and getting more and more perilous. And it's something, and again, as I said earlier, and as Josh had pointed out as well, we have to strike that balance.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you how we're going to do that in just a minute, because you anticipated where I was going. Before we get there, though, I just want to remind our viewers, and for anyone who joined late, we are going to leave some time for questions at the top of the hour in a little more than 10 minutes or so. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A button in the Zoom control bar. Enter your question there, and we'll get to as many as we can. So, okay, striking the balance makes perfect sense to me, and I think it makes perfect sense to a lot of New Jerseyans. Peter, how do you do that? Now, the governor has issued some executive orders. The question occurred to me was, is that enough? Doesn't the legislature have to get involved at this point? And then as you were talking, I was thinking, is that going to be enough? Because all those legislators, all the state senators and assembly people, many of them came up through the county, municipal and county government, and they understand the home rule ethos here in the state. Is there a way out of that, of imposing from the top if necessary? Well, let me ask you the question: is that the answer, to impose it from the top, to tell towns and municipalities and counties, no, sorry, this is a matter of statewide concern, we have to do it this way, this is the way we're going to do it? And is that even possible in New Jersey? Peter, you're going to have to solve this problem today. So.
Absolutely. So, I go back and forth on this, and so do clients that I have, so do consultants that I deal with. On the one hand, think of it almost from an affordable housing perspective. That is now a statewide mandate. Municipalities have fought against it, up to even including the most recent fourth round. I think 27 municipalities filed litigation that they tried to take up to the United States Supreme Court. They were kicked away at every turn. So that is from the state saying, this is you, Mr. Municipality, this is your affordable housing obligation, take it or leave it. So it is possible, I think, to take that more top-down approach, but then you run into also, so for example, most recently, Governor Mikey Sherrill signed Executive Order number 17, which establishes a housing governing council, which is designed to deal with the affordable housing crisis and where can we make use of state land and things like that, all designed to deal with this problem. One of the things that you're creating almost new red tape to get rid of red tape. And it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition that you have there, where a new council has been created that's designed to streamline these things. In New Jersey, in one particular I would say you have to take a look at regulation. Less legislation, more regulation, because every statute says the same thing. This particular body is empowered with adopting regulations in order to implement this legislation. And that's where, again, as another example, the real rules are a good example, because the legislature is now taking the position that the DEP relied on a statute that does not, in fact, authorize what they're trying to do. But the comprehensive and fully expansive nature of those regulations almost make you blink for a second, because you're thinking, if you don't have the authority to pass these sweeping regulations, which are very, very all encompassing as part in relative to certain portions of the state, what are we doing? So I think we have no choice but to kind of bring the authority in a little bit, because you've so many different municipalities weighing in on this. I think that the possibility for consensus is almost nil, because it's just too spread out. New Jersey has over 500 of them. I don't think you're going to get some sort of consensus as to, okay, we all need to work towards this particular goal. So I do think it has to come from the state itself. But again, I think you do run the risk of running into, okay, you're creating more regulation to deal with regulation, and then it becomes just this kind of endless navigation of red tape. And I think the overarching theme of this is uncertainty. We're constantly on shaky ground. We're constantly trying to figure out where we're going to go with this. And I see Kate kind of chopping at the bit. So I'll let her jump in there, because
okay. And I'm going to let Kate do that too. But Peter, I just want to say, I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that.
That's okay.
But all the things that you've said, I've heard before. I mean, I've heard from, and I'm sure everyone has heard them, the same sorts of complaints over and over and over again. You talk about streamlining. The governor has used that very term to describe what she's trying to do, is streamline permitting. So Kate, go ahead. What were you going to say about streamlining and how we do that, how we get that accomplished?
Well, New Jersey is a home rule state, and that will never change. There is no political appetite to change that. Anytime that there has been attempts over the years, we have very strong local elected officials, and the one thing that they hate more than anything is when upper levels of government try to take away that home rule. So I just don't think it's a realistic expectation to think that we're going to move away from what has always been the traditional practice here in New Jersey. But I do think the state can do a better job in how they regulate, right? And so I don't think anybody, whether it's any of the associations who are pro-development, are saying do nothing and have no environmental protections, right? It's about striking that balance. Right. I've been working on these real rules since they were first brought up. They were actually not legislated at all. There is no statute on this. This was an executive order that came from Governor Murphy, and it was part of PACT, which is Protecting Against Climate Threat. And there were 3 different regulatory schemes under there. There was AIR, and then REAL, which was the Resilient Environment and Landscapes. And that was broken into 2 components, inland flooding and coastal. The thing that's really important is that while everybody keeps calling these coastal rules and saying, oh, it's just going to affect people on the coast and at the beach, that's not true. Right. The rule is between 1,200 and 1,500 pages, which is extremely large for a rule. It also covers many, many, many topics and issues that have nothing to do with coastal resiliency and flooding. We call them in the coalition of groups that I've been working with, we call them the kitchen sink items, because it's basically every single thing except the kitchen sink that, different advocates and folks at the DEP have wanted to do over the last 20 years. They crammed it all into one rule because there was no statute kind of giving that authority. And they, in our belief, they went a little bit too wide because there are pieces in PACT, in the real rules, that have nothing to do with coastal and that touch every single square inch of the state of New Jersey, including getting rid of general permits, permits by rule, and permits by registration, which need very little to no administrative review currently. But once implemented in July, the queue that is already an 18-month to 3-year backlog, I've heard different things from different developers and folks in the industry, that queue is only going to get longer because the capacity at DEP is the same, but we're now adding more and more projects into that review queue. So again, no one's saying do nothing. No one is saying that sea levels aren't rising. We're saying, do we need to project out to the year 2100 and make these standards that are basically, well, they're not saying we're creating no build zones. They're creating so difficult, who in their right mind would build zones, right?
One of them is 3% impervious coverage, I think is on certain parts of the coast, which is maybe a shed if you're lucky.
And on-site stormwater retention, which in an urban or downtown environment is impossible, or significant improvements clause, where if you spend more than 50% improving a property, if you spend more than 50% of what you paid for a property improving it, now all of your grandfathering is gone. And so we're taking away the incentive to redevelop our urban core, our downtowns that are struggling. So there's a lot of different components in that real rule. And just quickly to tie this all up, New Jersey is a land-constrained, densely populated state. right? We know that. Add in the highlands, the pinelands, environmental justice communities, and the zones that will be impacted by these new real rules. Every square inch of the state is going to need some, in addition to all of the local, are going to need another level of state approvals through one of these other environmental zones. And again, no one is saying do nothing. It's finding that balance. And the first thing that we can do is joining the legislators who have introduced this legislative oversight resolution. Hopefully that will pass, or the governor will do what she's done with some of her other executive orders where we said, hey, wait a minute, let's put a pause on implementing this, get the stakeholders together, and really find a common sense compromise so that we can protect the environment, but that we're not killing all development opportunities, and that we're not killing the ability for us to expand and modernize our infrastructure, because all of those environmental zones also make it more difficult for us to improve and modernize our infrastructure.
Okay. Josh, where do you come down on this, the question of striking the balance and how we accomplish that in this state? Would you rather deal with 565 municipalities in 21 counties plus the state government, or a permitting czar and the office of the permitting czar and a bunch of deputy permitting czars who can maybe help you streamline some of the permitting that you need to do?
I'd rather deal with none of them.
Okay.
Although I wouldn't have a job in that context.
Yeah.
Let's not go that far.
Well, we don't want that to happen. So
this is one of those cases, in my opinion, that in theory and in concept it works, and in practice, it doesn't, right? And we could go on and on about this for probably the whole length of time of this meeting and this panel. But look, again, it goes back to there has to be a balance for all this. I think there needs to be more engagement and conversations with the people who actually have to live this, and the developers who do this for a living. What works, what doesn't work, engage the folks in the industry to really understand what, how we can come together to strike that balance. Because, rolling out a whole set of rules and trying to enact it in emergency fashion, and then realizing like, oh, wait a minute, okay, we're going to pull this back. It just creates confusion. And then nobody really knows, okay, everyone's scrambling to get something approved or grandfathered in a certain way. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, nope, we take that back, and now it's going to be done a different way. Look, there is a need for it. I don't think anybody's going to debate that. It's just, working together, not in a vacuum, and understanding how this plays out in a real world scenario that I think really needs to sort of prevail here.
Okay. Right. And just before we move on to another question, I'm curious though about what the owners of some of the projects are expecting now, because I've heard is that there's a lot of there has been, or at least pre-pandemic, there was a move toward more sustainable, more resilient construction. Folks looking for environmental certifications to show that they're actually and they're using it as a selling point for their buildings. Are those sorts of things still happening? Did you ever experience that where it's the owner of the project who wants the building to be a certain way to fit in with the environment and to not have the same kind of effects that we're talking about here?
What I'll say is, the term sustainability has always been a big, buzzword in my office for a while. There was a point in time, I'll call it 5-6 years ago, when LEED certification was cool, and everybody seemed to want to do it. Again, I think what we've shifted to is something more new and progressive. To, if you guys are familiar with ESG. Which is, basically, like I said, it's what we like to tell our clients and people that we work with is that we build to a sustainable standard. Going after those LEED certifications is just a procedural piece of paper thing at that point. Like, we like to say a lot of our buildings that we build just on our standard spec would probably pass for a certain LEED certification or sustainability certification. But actually going out and obtaining that piece of paper, that award, that accolade is not something that has been as appetizing to us. It's just building to a certain energy efficiency standard that is going to be sustainable for the future. And a lot of it also depends on the end user and the client that we're trying to attract to our in our buildings.
Okay, all right. I know we are just past the top of the hour, and we are going to get to questions. There are just a couple more things I want to put to our panels before we get to questions from viewers. The first is the whole question of NIMBYism, not in my backyard phenomenon. We've seen it with regard to warehousing, as I think you've all pointed out. There was a big boom in warehouse building, especially during the pandemic when e-commerce sort of took off, and there was this huge need, huge demand for these kinds of things. And you also mentioned data centers. And again, there's some backlash to that too. And what I keep hearing over and over again, and Peter and Josh, you may be the best folks to address this, is you got to get buy-in. You got to go into the towns. You got to convince the local people that what you're doing is actually really the right thing to do, and how you're going to take care of their community, and all the things that you're going to do to it, do for it. Peter, does that work? Does that help you in any way when when your clients go in and you make nice presentations, you bring everybody into the local community center, and you show them all the 3D models and all the ways that this is going to make the town beautiful? Does that help?
No.
No. Okay. In a word.
So I mean, you try, and because you want to be transparent. You never want to feel like you went in, you moved some things around, you did a little spot zoning, however you want to characterize it, and you got it basically legalized before you even went to the hearing. Nobody wants to feel like that's what you did. Nobody wants to do that necessarily. So the obvious goal always is to be transparent, so that the public is aware of not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it and how it could benefit them. The issue that we run into, and unfortunately this is an issue that you almost can't contend with on a policy level, is a very human issue where people sometimes simply don't want to hear it. And it doesn't matter how much outreach you do, what kind of focus groups you run. People have made their decision typically before they even arrive there. I'll give you an example. I had an application once where I said 5 times during the presentation that we have no need of public on-street parking. Every parking space we have is going to be on-site and off the street. 4 or 5 different members of the public during the public portion of the hearing said, where are they going to find all these on-street spaces? Every time I would quickly stand up, very quickly, board members, just a quick clarification, we do not need on-street parking. And I did that 4 times. And it's maddening, but it's what you kind of run into sometimes with the not in my backyard mentality. Is people don't want they moved there, they've lived there for however long, they like the way it is, they like the way it feels. Anything that might threaten that tends to put people into a certain position, and in my experience they tend to be pretty locked in. So that being said, you can't just not do it. I mean, there are certainly ways, and I'm very aware of this, where you can approach the township first, work with potentially getting it designated as a blighted area for need of redevelopment, which then you're designated the redeveloper. Now the options have opened up and things like that. So there's things you can do whereby by the time you get to your hearing, it's a foregone conclusion. And I can't say that those items don't exist and they're perfectly legal, but what everybody wants is for them to go there, say, this is what we're doing, and this is how it's going to benefit you. And members of the public say, oh, okay, you know what? Actually, that makes sense. We concede that we need to strike this balance, that we need infrastructure, that we need housing, whatever the application is. And everybody kind of comes to a compromise, let's say. But I mean, especially since COVID, it's just not realistic to think that that's how it's going to pan out most of the time, unfortunately. And I don't know that there's any way to contend with that very human issue on a policy level. I just don't know.
Well, our organization does work with municipalities and developers on the front end of a project to provide that direct project support and advocacy to try to explain to local residents and taxpayers, this is the benefit that's being brought to your community because of this development. Our members, our contractors, their families live in every municipality in New Jersey. So when we're coming to a meeting or we're doing a social media campaign, we can really speak to it as folks that live there, that work there, and that care about the end product because they have a stake in the game, right? Because they live in that town too. So it's another reason that our organization exists, and we've had a lot of success. Social media has made it really challenging, right? Because Before it was only your frequent flyers, the folks that come to every council meeting and every planning board meeting, and they are against everything, right? And you had those few and you could get around them. But with social media, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that gets spread so quickly. So it's another benefit of working with an organization like mine. And we've been brought in from local elected officials sometimes, and sometimes we're brought in with the developer. If a project doesn't exist, we don't even get to the conversation of whether it's going to be built union or non-union. So another reason why you might want to partner with an organization like mine. And the other thing I have to mention is that a lot of NIMBYism comes because we don't make the appropriate infrastructure investments on the front end. During the warehouse boom, we did not improve a lot of our state roads and our county intersections that intersect with state roads. And so you have these huge, massive thousands and thousands of square feet being built without adequate infrastructure improvements. And then people are affected by local traffic, right? And then that increases NIMBYism. Or with the data centers, the reason we're having this issue with data centers is because they're putting a strain on our energy infrastructure, which had over the last 10 years, we made responsible infrastructure, investments in direct supply of natural gas, building out our grid, more generation, we wouldn't be having this crunch. So it's that intersection of investments in infrastructure supporting development that I think can go a long way in helping NIMBYism, but it is really important to communicate directly to the residents and businesses and taxpayers in a community, and we're happy to help with that. So anybody interested in working with us, please let me know.
There you go. All right.
Can I support Kate's bid for governor one day? Just throwing that out there for you if we need to.
Okay, we are going to get to questions, I promise. I just want to wrap this up in this way. First, I want to get Josh on NIMBYism, because if I recall correctly, I think you're doing a lot of work in the industrial sector, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the backlash to warehouses, logistics, and the kinds of things that Kate was just talking about.
Yeah.
How big a factor is that in your work these days?
It's a huge factor.
Okay.
So much so that it's almost killed deals on a handful of occasions for us. And I think Peter touched on it, and I have to agree with him. No matter how much outreach you do, to some degree, the communities, they band together. And to Kate's point, there's social media where it really creates this powerful force that you really, no matter how much you try to reason or educate or give in to their requests, they've got their mind made up. Right. And so we try to, we do a lot of planning and strategizing around how we can best approach a township and a public forum where we know there's going to be some, animosity and some pushback. For example, doing a job in South Jersey that we had a whole band of people come out with T-shirts and, anti-warehouse T-shirts, and it got pretty contentious to the point where they were effective in essentially delaying our hearing on a handful of occasions because they came out in droves, and it became like an occupancy hazard to have them in the original setting of the planning board that we were scheduled to be at. So we had to get pushed a handful of times. So they were effective in that, but at the end of the day, luckily we were zoned as of right, and so we presented everything with minimal variances, or if any variances at all, and positioned ourselves in a way that we knew that we had a strong case to get our application approved. But it's tough. It is one of those things that as a resident of the state, and I put myself in their shoes for a sec, and even though I'm on the development side, and I want to build, if this was happening in my backyard, you do understand their position, right? You get it. And I think, but at the same time, I think I go back to the point that I said earlier. It's just one of those things that, getting the local township and the boards and all the elected officials, I think they have to do a better job to some degree on educating their residents and getting them comfortable with, hey, we know what we're doing. This is a good thing that's happening. It has to go somewhere. And, here are all the benefits that you guys as citizens of the town or wherever you're building, you have to gain to benefit from this. And we at Rockefeller, I think, we tend to try to accommodate maybe more so than some other some of our competition. We understand that community engagement's important, and we don't just build to build and turn a quick profit. We want to, we have a name to stand behind and a reputation to uphold. So, we try to go into that and embrace that through the approvals process.
Okay. And the final thing for me, I promise, before we get to questions, is for Kate. You mentioned infrastructure and the need for more infrastructure work and more infrastructure funding. There was a huge influx of federal dollars into New Jersey for infrastructure projects. It was one of the main pieces of the Biden administration's approach coming out of the pandemic to try to get the economy going again. For one thing, the Hudson River Tunnel project finally got going. The Portal North Bridge got replaced. The current administration has kind of thrown a wrench into some of this work. Was the money not directed in the right place, or is it just the need is just so great that it's almost impossible to get the dollars to where they need to go? What's causing what is, I mean, yes, years of neglect, but we all heard that there was all this money coming in. Where did it all go, and did it not go to the right places?
So it's a huge problem, right? It's such a huge undertaking that, yes, having federal funding really helps and has moved the ball forward. But the size of the problem, when you look at just how much we need, there's some estimates to say we need 70 to 80 billion dollars of water infrastructure investment over the next few years. Our roads and highways always need infrastructure improvements. We all know about the energy crisis, right? So it's just such a huge problem. We're going to need continued long-term capital for these types of projects. The other thing that's really challenging is that a lot of this money was made available. It goes on a spreadsheet and then it doesn't get out the door, right? Okay. So there's a gap between, we put money towards something and then the groundbreaking and actually deploying those dollars. And again, that goes back to a lot of it is because of the regulatory environment here in New Jersey makes it really difficult. Agencies who are doing regulating are also the ones who are supposed to be doing project delivery, right? And so there's only so much staff capacity. We also do, a lot of our agencies like DEP, like DOT, like the I-Bank have the ability to use third-party engineers, meaning they'll contract out with professionals to help them with some of these capacity issues, but they weren't utilized to their fullest extent, frankly, over the past few years. So that's a place that we could do a better job of getting those dollars once they're allocated actually into project delivery to start making a dent into this. But we are seeing a tremendous amount of public investment and a lot of utility investment. When I first started here at 825, it was during the mid 2000 recession. And I will tell you that the balance of public and private work today is actually worse than back then. I'm seeing way more public and utility work than I am private. And so that's concerning. And again, a lot of that is because of the high cost, the long time periods and uncertainty that are making it hard for projects to pencil. This is the same conversation we've been having since the very first question on this panel. So I think, again, addressing the regulatory environment and figuring out how we can reduce those timelines will help reduce costs, will help that project pipeline, making sure that we can make the appropriate investments in our infrastructure to support the development that folks like Josh and Peter want to do.
Okay. All right. And with that, we will move to questions. The first one I want to get to, because it picks up on the one of the themes that I've heard running through this discussion, that is the question of uncertainty. Considering all the uncertainties discussed here, how can we make sure that the project is moving within budget? What is the importance of working closely with the design team consultants from the concept stage of the project? Josh, this sounds like it's directed at you, so I'll start with you.
Yeah. I mean, my response to that is always just start engaging your consultants as early as possible. And by that, your vendors, your suppliers, your contractors, that's the one thing that you can never start too early. Build those relationships across the board, nationally, and just always have a finger on the pulse with that stuff. And to whatever extent you can, start that early procurement to try to get ahead of that uncertainty, the better off you're going to be. And in the cases where, you say, well, look, I don't feel comfortable putting dollars at risk that early because I don't know if the project's going to get approved and all of that, then, you have contingency. You got right. You got to have, extra dollars somewhere to plan for the uncertain. But just early engagement is really always my strategy on that.
Okay. All right. We have a couple of questions on, not surprising, because virtually every panel discussion we do has a question about artificial intelligence, and we have two of those. How is AI impacting the construction industry from your perspective, and what are the key trends? And they're basically the same question. What are the key trends in AI-based applications for construction firms? I'll just open it up to anyone, any of you who can tell us anything about how, if at all, artificial intelligence is affecting your work and the people you work with. Does anybody have any experience with AI at this point? And can that do anything to help some of the kinds of problems that we're talking about? Because it's supposedly it helps productivity and can do a lot of things that people would ordinarily take a long time doing. Is anyone using artificial intelligence at this point in your work? Kate,
I mean, I
Peter?
think everyone's
Yeah.
still trying to figure out how to best use it and get good at it, because it is a skill, being able to do those prompts and make it work for you and not give you false information or write something that doesn't make sense or create a graphic that looks really goofy, right? So it's a skill, and I think all of us as professionals are still in that learning period, and some are more far along than others. In the construction world, something that's been really important to Greg Lallavie and our leadership here has been our union believes that instead of fighting technological advances, we're going to embrace them and master them and be the ones who know how to use them, how to fix them, how to troubleshoot it. So as more and more technologies have been integrated into the heavy equipment that we operate, whether it's through the radar and sonar and different components in our equipment and cranes and in other pieces, we're making sure that our apprentices are now getting trained on the newer technologies. And a lot of times that means that the classroom training that they need is different than what was 10, 20 years ago. So we're making sure that we're partnering with community colleges, universities, and colleges. We have a pilot program called Earn and Learn, where we had a pilot group of apprentices who were, at the same time they were going through the apprenticeship, were also earning an associate's degree at a community college, and making sure that then they have a pathway to learn more of those technological advancements. So again, instead of fighting the fact that technology is happening and is being integrated into the construction world, we're going to make sure that we know how to use it. And because our members are the folks who fix construction equipment out in the site, we want to make sure that we can maintain it and fix it, because if a machine is down, that means lost time, lost money, right? And so we want to make sure that we're a part of that solution, but it's something that I think we're all trying to tackle and figure out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. I mean, AI is something that I'm very intrigued with. I'll also start by saying that I don't think it's a secret to anybody that the construction industry is probably one of the slowest industries to adapt to new technology. And, to some degree, I think we're still operating well behind, the technologies that are available that we could be benefiting from. So I would love to see a push with AI and trying to benefit from that. And I think one of the areas that we can start with, certainly, and I think we are to some degree. I mean, I've seen it in some of the work that I've been doing with my project teams, but in the early pre-con and design phase, design optimization, there's a lot of benefits to be had there through that type of technology. You have drones for sites that track progress, things of that nature. I think robotics, that's a little bit slower and probably a little harder to implement, but although I think there is a place for that at some point in our industry. I would love to see it on site. I know that there is concrete robotic, equipment out there that can pour concrete in a certain fashion to a certain structure. But I think just using it on the front end and on the administrative end to really optimize, how you track cost and schedule and making sure that you're staying on track with what you're underwriting.
Okay, very good. Okay, I'm curious. I'm going to pose this question and then turn it around a little bit. Are there any real estate sectors more impacted than others? and that gets to actually a question I was hoping to get to during the discussion, and that is, where are opportunities? Let's assume that yes, all the things we're talking about make it difficult to do certain things in certain places in certain areas. Peter, are there any sort of areas that you can see that maybe offer more opportunities or more possibilities for growth than some of the things we're talking about? I'll also ask because, again, just this morning I was in Metro Park for Hackensack Meridian Health's grand opening, and healthcare is and I think one of you mentioned the pharma industry. Healthcare has been a big area of focus for the state. Transit-oriented development before the pandemic, that was everybody wanted to do transit-oriented development, and this project actually took in both of those. Peter, are you seeing any areas where you think that where you would say, okay, yes, it works there, that's the kind of thing you should do, or is it just or is everything just the running into the same kinds of problems we're talking about here?
A lot of areas run into the same kinds of problems because, I mean, again, if you're talking about the pilands, the highlands, if there's wetlands on the property, are there other environmental concerns on the property? Is it preserved farmland, which New Jersey has a whole slew of, especially along certain portions of the state? So I think it was in context of new development, there are certainly opportunities and they can be found. But I think the best opportunity for the future of the state is redevelopment. So in terms of taking areas that are, the legal term I think is blighted, and addressing those, and really focusing on how we can revamp existing areas and existing infrastructure, I think is the more one. I think the channels to do so are already there, and because you're not dealing with just vacant land or again woods or whatever the heck it is, basically an empty lot. I think you have to I think you have to focus on both, but redevelopment I think is likely the where you can look for a little bit more of a short-term immediate result in terms of your efforts.
Right, and redevelopment, reusing,
Yeah, like the
adapting.
local housing and redevelopment law, where you can quite literally, a municipality can follow a process using typically their township or municipal planner to investigate an area, figure out whether or not it's blighted. And again, that's a legal term of art. And there's certain parameters and conditions you have to meet to demonstrate that an area is in fact blighted, which then authorizes the municipality to take steps that it otherwise could not take, up to and including condemnation and eminent domain, where they literally take it and then sell it to the designated redeveloper, which they have to formally designate via township resolution and or ordinance, and say, okay, you are now the designated redeveloper in a context, and you're going to develop it in accordance with this redevelopment plan. For example, the Monmouth Mall, which is in Eatontown, that's a very big redevelopment project that is now, I believe, I'm not working on it, so don't quote me, kind of taking more of a town center approach.
Yes.
The mall itself is kind of dead. That was done through redevelopment, and it has the potential to kind of revamp, a lot of what was going on there. So again, I think you have to focus on both. We certainly can't strictly limit ourselves to redevelopment, but I think you're going to see a quicker and more immediate result using the redevelopment tools that New Jersey that already exists within the law. And then, of course, there are other areas that you can look to in the southern parts of the state where you just have the room and you just have to find the right spot.
Okay. All right. We're almost out of time, and I do want to give you each a chance to sort of wrap things up. I did want to get to this one more question, at least this one more question, though, and that is, how can developers speed up land use approvals? We've talked a lot about the sort of structural problems and the bureaucracy and the way New Jersey sort of works in terms of land use approvals. Is there anything developers can do or should do to speed things up? I think Josh and Peter, Josh, you're nodding. So is there anything that developers can do or should be doing to make the best of what you're all describing?
Yeah, for me, my experience is get in with those agencies, state, local, county, early.
Okay.
Have the pre-app meetings, have the technical consults, hire a good land use counsel. And, to some degree too, we've engaged lobbyists to help, with expediting some permit review and approval. Because of the, yeah, you got to have a good project roster and professionals that have been through it, know the right resources and contacts to reach out to, and request those meetings with those agencies to, troubleshoot it on the front end so that they know it's coming down the pike, and B, hopefully there's a little less surprise on the back end once they review it, with whatever applications you have in.
Okay. Kate and Peter, anything you want to add to that question?
No, I would simply second what Josh says. Josh said almost pretty much in its entirety, which is do a lot of work on the front end. The most successful applications I deal with are those circumstances where most of the work has been done before we enter the hearing room, where you've done your pre-app meetings. That's always a big tool where you take your professionals, and again, hiring a good roster is always very important. And then you work with the township's professionals. You kind of hash out the things that you might have otherwise hashed out at the hearing a little bit beforehand, rather than just filing an application, getting a review letter, responding to that. You want to kind of front end those issues as much as possible. And the other thing I typically tell clients is don't frown at compliance, because if you can render a project compliant with the applicable zoning, whether it's setback requirements, use, stormwater, however, of course, there are circumstances where that's simply not the case, and you have to adjust accordingly. But when you're looking at a circumstance where you think, okay, we can actually decrease the square footage a little bit, and we don't really need this office space, and and you can make it an application where I can go in comfortably and say that the board cannot legally deny it. And if they do, an appeal up to Superior Court is likely to return a very positive result. You got to wait another 6 months to a year, but you'll get it. And that is always something I tell people, never kind of just scoff at. To the extent that you can comply with what the township is already asking for, do so as much as you can. Again, if you can't, no worries, we'll address it. But if you can, try and navigate those channels as best you can.
Okay, very good.
My one thing is, yes, early, and engage with organizations like mine early, who can help you and save you some money on those lobbyists and help you navigate these projects early on.
Okay, very good. Sage counsel from everyone. Okay, as I said, I wanted to give you all a chance to offer some final thoughts. So this time we'll go around the other way and start with Josh. Anything you'd like to reiterate, underscore, mention that you haven't before?
No, not necessarily. I can, just obviously thank you again for having me on the panel. It's been a really, good discussion, productive. I think we're all living in a time now with, again, I'll keep using the word uncertainty, but that is the key term for this discussion. And I think to some degree, this is the new normal, right? And I think the sooner we all sort of recognize that, the golden years, I'll call them, of pre-pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, where every interest rates were low and development was booming. That was sort of an unprecedented time in our industry. And, I think we're back to a little bit more of a normal life cycle for development now. And, these issues that we keep talking about, I think will just become like the standard. Hopefully not, but I think we're just going to have to start getting comfortable with it, unfortunately.
Okay, very good. Kate, final thoughts from you?
Thank you so much, Jeff, and my fellow panelists. This was a really great discussion. I think the big takeaway here is we need to reform our permitting and approval process if we're going to, mitigate the issues brought on by uncertainty and higher costs. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and it was great to meet both of you.
Thank you. And Peter, that means you'll take us out.
Great. Thank you all again so much for your time. It's been a great discussion. Kate, Josh, it's very nice to meet you guys. I'll piggyback off of what they have said. I agree 100%. The only thing I'll add to that is as you're navigating through these problems, whether it's working towards your approvals or working towards reform, where we can streamline our approvals, make sure you have the best team available to you. And I think working with somebody like Josh, working with somebody like Kate, and shamelessly working with somebody like me, is a good place to start, because you want people who can help you navigate both, whether it's you're moving forward, with what is potentially the new normal, or you're moving forward with the new normal while pushing for things to change a little bit. You want people on their side who know their craft, know what they're doing, and can do so not only effectively but cost efficiently, because as we've said, cost is a very important factor nowadays in construction and development. And if your team is efficient in the sense that, listen, they get things done, they get it done well, and they do it in a time frame that others might not have been able to do so, that's worth its weight in gold.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Thank you to all of our panelists. As always, you can read our coverage of today's event later on njbiz.com, and we'll have expanded coverage in our May 11th print edition. And remember to look for the recording link. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.